This is a Sandy Boy Productions podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to Why is Everyone Yelling with Lindsay Hine. I am your host Lindsay and I'm so grateful you're here today. I have a little bit of a sinus cold, so please excuse my voice on this intro. I have a really exciting episode today. This is our first time reoccurring guest on the show. You're listening to episode 14, and I'm talking with Alex Caspera. Alex is a registered dietitian and plant-based chef. She is the founder of Delish Knowledge and the co-founder of Plant-Based Juniors. So she was episode 6 on the podcast. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, make sure you go back and check it out. We had so much to talk about in that episode, we decided to come back and do a second round. This episode is packed with so much great information. We talk about language in the kitchen with our kids, giving the kids choices around mealtime within reason, picky eating, getting in the protein you need in plant-based foods, supplements, seasonal eating, and so much more. She also ends the episode with some great book recommendations. In this episode, we touch on Alex's free 7-day protein guide as well as a free supplement guide. You can find links to those in the show notes at sandyboyproductions.com. And if you're interested in purchasing her ebook, you can use the code Lindsay for 15% off any of their ebooks. And one more thing, in this episode I mentioned the vitamins that my kids take every day, and that is Previnex Supervites. And if you want to check those out for your kids, you can use the code ANOTHER at checkout when you go to Previnex.com. I have great luck with 2 of my 4 kids taking those every single day. Again, that's Previnex.com. Use the code ANOTHER to get 15% off your order when you check that out. All right, friends, I hope you get as much out of this episode as I did. Enjoy my conversation with Alex Caspera. Today on the podcast, I am so excited to welcome back our first returning guest, Alex Caspera, to the show. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Yeah, hey, thanks, Lindsay, for having me here.
Yeah, so this is our plant-based dietitian on the show. She's like our resident dietitian, apparently, our returning guest. The first time we talked, though, we had so much to cover, and I just knew if you would be willing, I wanted to have you back on.
Yes, yeah, let's keep going.
And for those of you who aren't already following Instagram, our Instagram, Why is Everyone Yelling, Alex took over yesterday and did an amazing job. It was so fun to have you kind of on the stories, connecting with people and sharing a lot of things that we're going to talk about today on the podcast as well. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that was really fun. I mean, I could talk all day, as you know, about these topics. So it's always fun to hop on and chat about them with someone else.
Okay, so let's start with protein today. I know you just came up with a new 7-day or a new plant-based protein 7-day thing with 40 recipes. And
yes.
My friend Emily, who does plant-based for the most part at home as well, was just over at my house lifting in my garage, and we were talking about this, and she struggles with getting her boys to eat non-meat protein. So here's the deal. Her husband's a vegan. She eats mostly vegan, but the kids still eat, everything.
Sure.
And so,
nuggets.
Yeah, all the things. And so when she sits down and has a meal with her family, and I have this issue too sometimes, it's hard to get her kids to eat protein that's not meat. They're not into beans. So let's just kind of talk about some plant-based protein options and also a little bit about the 7-day plan you have.
Yeah. So lots of things sort of dive in there. Actually, I was inspired after our conversation last time, and we kind of delved a little bit into the protein thing. And I was like, you know what? I feel like that's something I keep hearing. I want to create something where it's really succinct for someone who's either like your friend Emily, where it's yes, I feel very comfortable doing this for myself, maybe not my kids, or someone who just is I've been kind of hearing about this plant-based thing and I want to do more. I want to look into it. So I created a 7-day email series, and it's essentially, it walks you through how to cook tofu, how to cook tempeh, how to cook seitan, how to cook beans, how to cook lentils. It's got 40 recipes. It's absolutely free. You can sign up on my website and I'll give you the the link to have in your show notes, but it really is sort of like a basics guide about not only how to cook them, but also sort of all of your plant-based protein questions answered. So that's something that I really wanted to do and to help people, because I feel like so much of the barrier is, yeah, beans, what do I do? If I have this can of beans, what do I do with them? And I feel like lentils, it's just like, okay, besides lentil soup, now what? And tofu, gosh, I mean, that is so foreign to a lot of people, tempeh, etc. So that's really the whole premise of my new free course. And, back to your friends thing, I think there's a lot of things I would sort of suggest if I was in there lifting with you in the garage, or if she was coming over, if we were talking. And the first one would be, are we offering them in ways that feel normal to our kids, right? So if our kids are only exposed to, let's say, that the typical sort of kid-friendly things, and not to generalize, but, the pepperoni, the chicken nuggets, the fish sticks, now adding, let's say, a side of just black beans is going to feel weird. Or if we're going to have, let's say, even like tofu, if it's not prepared in a way that feels really familiar, it can feel like, oh, I don't know what that is. And a lot of kids will do that to any food, but especially a food that isn't part of their sort of normal diet. So I would say, I've got a recipe for like tofu chicken nuggets on my website. So if someone wants to try that, using lentils maybe as like a taco, or in taco, maybe we make the ground beef tacos and add in the lentils to sort of start to try to introduce them to them, but not make it the entire part of the dish, or sort of some tips I would recommend to try.
Let's talk about tofu. You brought up the tofu nuggets. Tell me all the things about tofu, like nutrition-wise, all the good stuff.
Yeah. So I will first admit too, I mean, I know tofu is really weird. I get it. If you are, if you're brand new to this, I feel like tofu is one of those things where if you've had it really well prepared, you get it. You like it. You feel like, oh, yeah. That's a protein I really enjoy. I really like. It's so easy to get wrong that if you have soggy, tasteless tofu, look, I completely understand the turn off and the idea where you'd be like, why would you ever willingly eat that? So I get that. I've been there. One thing that I really try to do is to sort of teach people how to prepare tofu correctly. And the first thing you've got to do, for the most part, is press it. So tofu, if you've ever purchased it, it comes packed in water, and that water is really flavorless, and it makes sort of that soggy texture that tofu is sort of notoriously known for if it's prepared wrong. So you got to get that water out. All you do, what I do, is just wrap it like in a kitchen towel or some paper towels, put some heavy things on top. I usually do like a cast iron skillet with some canned beans. They have fancy tofu presses out there. If you eat a lot of tofu, get one. I have one. I love it, but you don't have to have that. Essentially just let it go for about 5-10 minutes, and you will see all this water come into your kitchen towel or to your paper towel. That is where the flavor is leaving, and it's your job to get the flavor back in. So you can now take that pressed tofu and add a marinade, just like you would to a chicken or a fish or whatever kind of other protein you're used to. Any marinade you like in that capacity will also work in tofu. So you can remarinate it in that sauce now that all that water is taken out of it, or you can do like a dry rub. And I'll do that a lot, where I'll take like a little bit of olive oil and some dried herbs and toss it really well with some cubed tofu, and then pan fry it or saute it. And that's honestly what I do probably like 2 nights a week for my kids with like a pizza seasoning, and they love it. It's got a lot of flavor. I think that tofu is sort of like chicken. I don't think chicken on its own has a lot of flavor, but if you prepare it correctly, it's really good. Anyone who's had like boiled chicken or like chicken that doesn't have a lot of sauce or seasoning on it, it can also taste bad. And I think that tofu is sort of the same thing. Nutritionally, I really like tofu, right? It's low in fat. It's got a ton of great plant-based protein. It also has fiber. That's one of the other benefits about consuming sort of these plant-based proteins. They also contain that fiber. It's got calcium, because it's used calcium to help set it to get that firm texture. It's got some iron in it. It's really got a lot of nutrition, especially for kids. And we talk about, what are the things that we're usually most concerned about them not getting enough of. Iron, calcium tend to be sort of top of the list. And so tofu, I think, is a really great way for them to enjoy it. And, I get it. Tofu might not be appealing to every child, but there are some fun sort of kid-friendly ways to do it. And we do have plenty of sort of kid-friendly tofu recipes on the Plant-Based Juniors website and also on Delish Knowledge.
Yeah, I think it's interesting if you start out offering that kind of food to your kids, right?
Mm.
It probably works a lot better. And a lot of us are like, oh, my kid's like 8, 10 or whatever. And it's now trying to introduce it. It's like,
Yeah.
backtracking is hard. What are your thoughts on that? Like those people that are brand new parents and they're
Hmm.
like, would you say introduce stuff like that early? And then
Yeah.
people like
Yeah.
me who are like just now starting to kind of introduce tofu to their kids.
Right. Right, right. So I'm a big believer in sort of considering what you would call the family meal, right? Like what types of foods do you want in your family? And they don't have to be the same thing all the time. The first time you give your kids tofu, they might not eat it, right? If this is a brand new thing to them, especially if they're used to sort of eating the more stereotypical kid food and you give them like a sauteed tofu, they might look at it, they might poke it, maybe they try a little bit of it, but most kids are not really willingly to take a bite of something that feels really foreign to them. And that's where sort of this concept of exposure comes in, where it's like, okay, if you as a parent have decided, hey, this is a food that I really like, or this is a food that I want our family to eat more of, I've been hesitant to introduce it to my kids for whatever reason, that doesn't mean that we never do it. We just know that it might take 10 times. It might take 15 times. There's sort of two things that research shows us that really helps kids to be more accepted of new foods. One is you modeling it as a parent, right? So if you're eating the tofu without any big deal around it or, big, to do with it, just eating it, normally enjoying it, and they see that, then it's like, oh, okay, well, mom eats it. It's not so weird. But if you're really nervous about it or like, I don't know, what do you think? Did you try it? I don't know if I like it. I mean, all of those messages are going to get absorbed by our kids. And now it's going to become this new weird food on the plate. And it's going to just take a little bit more for them to get excited about trying it. The other thing comes down to exposure. And that's, maybe they help cook it with you. Maybe you explain like, hey, this is something a little bit new, especially for older kids, right? It's not like we can't talk to them about food or what we're trying, or like, hey, I saw this new recipe online. It looks really cool. Do you want to help me? We have to press it to get all the water out. Any ways that you can have them join in with preparation or cooking or having it on their plate. All of those things count as exposure. And I think really giving yourself, again, that sort of grace to be like, yeah, this might not be a home run family meal the first time, just like any new food doesn't tend to be that way. But over time, it becomes part of what we consider to be the family meal. And it's, sort of our job to offer that often if that's what we want our kids to eat.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked that I saw on your Instagram was pulling apart the meal. So like say I want to have a big salad or something like that, or I'm trying to make this new recipe. I got the new Oshi Glows cookbook, so I'm like all up
So
in
good.
that. Did you get it?
It's so good. Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the dinners one.
Order. Oh yeah. I love her stuff.
So I find myself like I'm making these lentil sloppy joes, right? With roasted red peppers and sun-dried tomatoes. It is so good. And only one of my kids willingly tried it. Nobody else tried it. But I'm trying to think of ways to pull apart meals like this so that my husband and I can enjoy these like delicious sort of exotic dinners, but also give my kids, like they're not going to eat the lentil burgers. And I know in our last conversation you said, as long as you're giving them at least one thing that they'll eat, you can feel good about that. But when I'm making like sloppy Joe lentils, like what is the other thing I offer them? Because we're probably going to eat like a salad on the side, or we had quinoa and broccoli on the side.
Yeah, yeah. So two schools of thought with that. One is I do that a lot as well, right? So I like to, when I consider like what my menu is going to be for the week, I take a little bit into consideration what my son wants, but I also don't cater only to his needs, right? I kind of look at it as like he's part of the family, which means maybe 2 nights a week, I'm really going to think like, okay, I'm going to create a home run meal that I know my son is going to love. And then the other 4 or 5 nights a week are what I want to eat. And I make sure that, let's say I'm making those lentil sloppy joes. I sort of say you can go one of two ways, depending on sort of what your parenting philosophy is and also where this has been introduced. If this sort of idea of the division of responsibility or these sort of new foods is brand new to you and your kids, it might be a lot easier to sort of say, okay, well, maybe they'll eat, maybe they'll just, I'm just going to use an example, maybe they'll just eat the lentils without the sauce. Okay, great. So I will just pull apart some lentils to put on their plate. And I know they like quinoa, I know they like broccoli, and I know they love strawberries. I'm going to make sure to offer that as well. Great. It's okay for them to have a dinner that kind of, doesn't make sense. If it's just like quinoa and broccoli and a little bit of cooked lentils and strawberries, if they like that, that's great. You can also take the approach of, this is what's for dinner. I'm going to make sure that I'm offering you strawberries or broccoli on the side, or crackers even, if you know that's what your kid will like. But I'm also going to make sure that I am putting that lentil sloppy joe on your plate. Doesn't have to be a big portion, right? When I'm making like sandwiches or things that I'm not quite sure my son's going to eat, I'll give him, maybe a 2-bite thing. So it's on his plate. He is allowed to see it. He might tell me right away when that plate goes down, I don't want to eat it. And my response always is, you don't have to, but it's on your plate because that's what dinner is. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't touch it, no big deal. And that might take, like I said before, 15 times for them to sort of get to see what it is. The other night I was making like a quinoa enchilada casserole, and it was sort of very similar to lentil sloppy joes. It had quinoa in it. It had a ton of peppers. I think I put some kale in it. I did, beans, corn, this like spicy sauce. It's one of my favorite dishes. I know my son hates it. So I could have either said, okay, well, that's for dinner tonight, and you can have some, sweet potato fries on the side or whatever I decide to make you. But instead, what I did was, I know he likes quinoa and I know he loves corn. I know he likes black beans sometimes. So as I was making the dish, I kind of pulled, a few of those aside, put on his plate already. And then I finished making the rest of the meal. And I really think it comes down to, as a parent, how much sort of, time you have to prepare meals. That might work for meals that are easy like that to deconstruct, and other meals it just might not work. And, again, I really do believe in this idea that you get to decide what is on your kid's plate. There's going to be a lot less friction if you're also introducing things they're going to like and they're going to eat. And so I always make sure to include at least one of those things. But I think sometimes as parents, we get so like, oh, they have to have these, really complete nutritional meals every single time. And that doesn't have to be the case, especially because we are trying to say that the short-term approach is like, okay, yeah, we could cater to every single meal and always offer things that we know they're going to eat. But that gets really frustrating and really tiring for the parent. And that's just, I don't think, a sustainable way for our kids to learn, different types of foods and be exposed to things. But also it makes mealtime feel really miserable. And it makes for a really unhappy situation. I might like tofu nuggets, but I do not want to eat them 5 nights a week. I love tacos, and my son, that's his favorite meal. We always have tacos once a week. I don't want to eat them 5 nights a week. And I know if I offered it 5 nights a week, that would be, the best mom ever award, but that's just not how my sort of family meal goes. And so I think it just comes back to what we want for the long term, and approaching sort of like each day as like, okay, a little bit of a win here and there. And no, you're not going to, hit a home run every single time with every single kind of meal.
I like the point that you brought up that like 2 nights a week you pick to focus on meals that they like, because that makes it feel less stressful, because I know that 2 nights people are going to be really happy with what's in front of them.
Well, I think it's sort of, is the approach of like, it's not my way or the highway. I don't want people to hear that. It's more of the idea that like, we are a family unit, and yes, my son might only be 3, but I still consider his preferences. They just don't rule my entire meal planning. Just like my husband's meal preferences don't rule my entire meal planning. I take into consideration, like, I know he's really going to like this meal, but he might be lukewarm on a curry, but I still want to offer that as one of the meals we're going to have. It might not be, everybody's favorite meal every single night, but it's taken into an account what my son likes, what my husband like, what I like, what our budget is, what our accessibility is, all those different factors that come into meal planning, and trying to make sure that everyone gets a win, but everyone doesn't have to win every single night.
I also like that for kids that are a little bit bigger too. I mean, maybe even a 3-year-old too, let them have say in the meal planning. So like Tuesday and Thursday, these are the 2 nights, like it's all on you. You can pick out what we have for dinner given, with reason.
Yeah,
but kids like
in general receive things really well when they have some sort of say in the matter. So that's a really good idea.
Yeah.
I've never really done that. I mean, my 3-year-old did ask for pancakes last night and I had no other plan. So I just made pancakes, but I like kind of like sort of giving them that option ahead of time so that then on Monday night, they know Tuesday's their night that they picked to make tacos. That's kind of fun.
Yes, totally. Well, and even kind of going back to that lentil sloppy Joe option, if you just asked your kid, what do you want on the side? Well, that could open Pandora's box to whatever. But if you said, okay, for a vegetable tonight, and I do this often, with my son, we can either have broccoli or cauliflower. What do you want? I have both of those in the fridge, and it kind of feels like, oh, he got to choose. It's a small thing. He might not even like the rest of the meal, and I usually try to do that at least one time in a meal. Like for breakfast, I'll say, do you want oatmeal or cereal? Those are the two options. They're both pretty easy and he gets to choose which one. And I'm happy with whatever one he's choosing. So, if he says cake, well, that's not on the menu.
Yeah.
The menu is oatmeal or cereal.
Yeah. Tell me, is there anything else more about the 7-day protein plan though to talk about before we move to the next topic?
No. I think people are going to like it. It's got 40 recipes in it. It covers things about how much protein you need. It goes into considerations about if you're active, if you're sedentary, if you're, depending on what your age range is, all sort of the things as a dietitian, I would think, what do people want to know about protein and what kind of myths are out there? And then of course, how do you actually cook it and how do you prepare it that you like it?
And one thing I will note from the last episode that we talked about, in case anybody hadn't heard that, I really liked how you kind of brought up, everybody has this thought, a lot of people have this thought of protein, like, let me get this big hearty serving of protein. But what we don't realize sometimes is that we're getting little hits of protein from different things we're eating throughout the day that aren't necessarily high protein sources, but you add them all up.
Yes. And, I call it the plant-based protein course just sort of to cater to, I think, what people are looking for. But, I sort of say that I think one of the huge benefits in everyone adding more plant-based proteins is that they're not just singular macros, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm eating a bean, yeah, I'm getting protein. I'm also getting a ton of fiber. I'm getting prebiotics. I'm getting iron. I'm getting zinc. I'm getting calcium. I'm getting, all these different nutrients that are, especially when we talk about an animal protein, you're going to just find a different nutrition profile, but especially you're going to miss all of those beneficial prebiotics and all those beneficial fibers, which I think is what makes plant-based eating, especially if that's not, how you eat all the time, but just adding more of those meals in, so helpful to reduce things like chronic disease and also improve overall gut health.
Yeah. Okay. So you guys I just got your newsletter in my email today and I thought, oh my gosh, we should add this to our talking points because the email was about talking to your kids about food and language and like when they're helping you in the kitchen. And I have to say, yesterday I was so proud when I was making those pancakes. My husband had my 2 big boys across the street. So I just had the little 2. I just picked them up from daycare. And Russ, my 3-year-old, was helping me make the pancakes. And he goes, that calls for baking powder, not baking soda. And I just love that he was said that it calls for this. I thought that was so fun. Let's talk about language and talking to our kids in the kitchen.
Yeah. So one thing I'm really big on is the idea that, and every parent knows this, right? You say things and then your kid parrots it back to you and you're like, oh, okay. Didn't realize I said that. Didn't realize you were listening. Yep. So, that is also true of how we speak about food. We talked in our last conversation about some of my background and, having sort of this eating disorders background, I'm very aware of how I speak about my body in front of my kids and also how I speak about food. And so, there are a lot of ways we can describe food. We can describe food about the kind of nutrition it has. We can describe food at sort of the macro level. We can talk about, the energy the food gives us, but we can also talk about the characteristics. And I think that the characteristics of food, especially if we're dealing with picky eaters, is one of those ways that helps to sort of bring the food to life and doesn't make it just like a yuck or yum, right? So what I mean by that is a lot of times when a child is trying a new food, our sort of go-to response is like, do you like it? Or, oh, is it yummy? And that, usually, especially if a child is very picky or there's some, control issues going on, the easiest answer for them to say is no, or yuck, or I don't like it. And, then it's like that conversation is kind of shut down. But instead we can say, oh, is it crunchy? Is it creamy? Is it tangy? Is it spicy? Like my son loves saying things are astringent because I use that word. I think it's like so funny, just those little things. And he'll say, oh, yes, it is crunchy. Oh, it is creamy. He doesn't really necessarily understand all of the things he's saying, but he's hearing me describe it. And that sounds really fun to him. I'm sort of talking about food in a way that has nothing to do with the nutrition that it's providing him, because at 3 years old, he doesn't need to know that. And I'm also taking away any really opportunity for him to say, I don't like it, because we're sort of describing food in a much more factual way. And so I think that if you're trying to, talk to your kids or have mealtime be about the food, but not have it be about the food in sort of a pressure way, it's an easy way to talk about what you're eating and how maybe it sounds in your mouth or what color it is, especially with younger kids. They get all that. It's fun for them to crunch and to hear that, or to, bite into something and say, ooh, it's sour, or it's really sweet, or I love that pretty color. Even if, again, they're not eating these foods or liking these foods necessarily, it's also a way for them to be involved in the overall conversation. And all of these things count as exposure. And I know I'm like a broken record on that, but it really is sort of like, I'm trying it this way, I'm trying it that way, I'm trying it this way. All of these ways count when we're trying to expose our kids to new foods.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite things to involve because 3 is pretty young to involve him in the kitchen? I know you guys make smoothies together. My kids, if I give them the option to help cook with me, they want to. But, it's so easy to be like, oh, no, let me just do it because it's faster by myself.
And please don't think that 3 meals a day I have my toddler up in the kitchen with me and we're just having a mess and I'm smiling. Like, that's not true. We do have a kitchen helper, which I think makes things a lot easier. He thinks he knows how to get it, so he can, drag it across the floor and put it up to the counter, and that feels really fun for him. So he loves to make smoothies. That's sort of the one thing that we make. I wouldn't say every day, but maybe 5 times a week we do that together. He likes to stir. So if I'm making, let's say, like a sauce, I'll sometimes say, hey, do you want to come in and stir? A lot of times he just sits in the kitchen with me, right? So we have like an island with the bar stools that have the sorry, I can't even think about it, the edges on them. He's not falling off the bar stool. So he's sitting there with me and I am cooking, and, he'll just say, hey, mommy, what's that? And I'll say, let's say, oh, it's a beet. Look at that color. Do you want to see it? And a lot of times he says no, but he's still in there watching me cook and prepare it. So even if he's not actually involved in making the food, he's sort of seeing things with me. A lot of times if I'm cooking, I'll say, here, do you want to try this? Do you want a bite of this? So, I think anything where you feel like, you have the time to involve your kids, especially if they're younger, just know it's going to get a little messier. It's going to take a little bit more time to make that dinner. So that might not be every day, but it might be twice a week where it's like, you know what, I've got a little bit more time for dinner tonight, or I've got a little bit more time making these pancakes. I'm going to say, hey, do you guys want to come in and help me? And maybe the answer is no, but if it's yes, that's a really fun way to involve them.
I want to talk about the picky eater thing, because I did hear you and Whitney talking about this. They say the common, I think that people say, kids need to be introduced to food at least 10 to 12 times, whatever, before they might like it. But then Whitney was talking about how she offers her child broccoli 3 times a week. And so sometimes those numbers go into the hundreds. So don't get discouraged and think, oh, they're never going to like broccoli.
And maybe they don't, right? I mean, I think that even as adults, we can all be like, I have tried myself. I have really tried to try fennel because it's in a lot of, I don't like it. It is, every single time I take a bite, I'm like, oh, I really don't like that. I'm not a big fan of mustard green. I just don't like them. You can try to make different kinds of carrot greens and I just don't like that flavor. And I have really tried myself. So if we imagine those same feelings our kids are having, I get it. You just don't like that food. That's okay. So I think there is some acceptability of this isn't their favorite, and they might not like it. We can expose them all the times that we want. And that's just not going to be a food that they like. But there are times, and I think, again, as an adult, you can think like, oh, yeah, I didn't like that food at all as a kid. And now I really like it. I was never a huge Brussels sprouts eater, but my gosh, if I see Brussels sprouts on the menu, like we're ordering 2 servings, like I love them now. But that was not the case at 10. And we ate them often, when I was growing up. So I think it's sort of, trying to imagine yourself as your child and how you have your same food relationship with different things and knowing that they're going to be in a similar boat.
Yeah, I was thinking back to that with those lentil burgers I was talking about earlier. There are definitely some flavors in there that were pretty strong that as an adult, like I really liked, but I could see how a child's taste buds might be like, that is weird. So I'm thinking like it does make more work, but we were talking about pulling out pieces of it, like pull out the lentils or whatever. But I really think if I just made it super basic for the kids in one pan and put all those exotic spices in my pan, they probably, at least my oldest, would have still eaten it.
Yeah. And you can try it that way the first time, right?
Yeah.
So we can say, hey, maybe that's what it is and offer it that way. And, maybe the next time we do a little bit more. That is one thing that, if you're listening and maybe you haven't started introducing kids yet to food, I really try to encourage the idea that like there is this like honeymoon period where about 6 months to about 18 months, most kids are really accepting of foods. And this is where I think it goes against a lot of what we feel is appropriate or we feel is okay or safe. And I'm not saying, give your kids like chili peppers to suck on, but it is okay to say, ooh, let's put some curry powder in those lentils I'm giving you, or I'm going to try to, cook your broccoli and maybe I'll roast it with some cumin or, something where it's a little bit more of a stronger profile. When we introduce kids to that younger, they're more likely to accept those stronger flavors later. So if you know that those are flavors that your kids are really not used to, imagine now offering a different food and a different flavor profile. That's a lot for a young kid to take at once, right? So we've really got to sort of, I think go slowly and understand that they want to like food too. They don't want to feel disappointed at dinner all the time. How do we make it so we're, not cooking all these different meals, but also increasing acceptability?
Okay, let's talk about foods that we can add in to meals, like superfoods, adding chia seeds to smoothies and things like that. And I originally in my head thought sneak them into smoothies, but obviously that probably isn't great to sneak things because you want them to know, that certain foods are really good for them. Like you want them to know that a chia seed is good for them. I'm sure there's a balance here, right?
Yeah. So I'm not into the sort of concept of like, I'm going to get them to eat this and I'm sneaking it in. And I get this question a lot when it comes to smoothies because, like I said before, we make smoothies a lot and, I pack those things, right? Like there's always some type of green usually in there. I usually do chia, hemp, flax seeds, maybe I'll add in different kinds of nuts sometimes or foods that my son might not regularly grab and eat, but he'll eat it, he'll eat beets blended up in a smoothie. He's not going to eat them on their plate. So is that sneaking it in? And I think it comes back to the awareness, right? So if I'm handing my son or if he's making a smoothie with me and he sees there's kale in a smoothie, that to me is not sneaking it in. That's just sort of being lucky and knowing that he's going to eat that green smoothie, even with, the kale in there that he might not normally eat if it's just raw or cooked on his plate. What I don't like is the idea of, oh, I'm not going to serve my kids those foods willingly. I'm just going to sneak them into everything, because what we miss out on is the opportunity again to expose and to teach them that like, oh yeah, they like that food. And my son will even sometimes say like, I only like spinach in smoothies. And I'm like, yeah, that's right. Right now, that's all you do. And that's okay. And, I think that whenever we sneak things, we take away that learning opportunity. But that doesn't mean that we can't do it in a way that they're aware of. So I love, those kind of things in smoothies. I'm a big fan of like making pasta sauces. So one thing that we shared actually recently on PBJs is sort of this like pasta that we do often, where I'll take a jar of whatever kind of sauce you like into a blender. I'll throw in some carrots, I'll throw maybe a bell pepper, whatever kind of veggies you have, maybe a handful of spinach, and puree it. Blend it up, especially if we're sort of talking about those like yellow orange colors, like a sweet potato or carrot or red or green or yellow bell pepper. It doesn't change the color of the red pasta sauce too much, so you're not now getting this like brown sauce. But then you add it to your pasta sauce that your pasta that your kids really like. Wow, now we've increased vitamin A, we've increased vitamin C, we've given them extra nutrition. That to me is totally fine, but I'm not telling my son. So I might say as he's eating, like, did you know that I put sweet potatoes in that pasta sauce? Or, here, do you want to come help me blend? I just think that we never want to feel like we're tricking our kids. When our kids feel tricked that they're eating something that we didn't tell them, it feels like they can't trust us. And sort of going back to the conversation that we talked about a lot last time, we really want our kids to, we need trust in eating, and we need trust in food, because if we break that, then it feels like I don't trust you to choose what kind of foods that you want for your body, and you don't trust me to offer you when the foods I think that we're going to have as a family.
Yes, I totally am on board with that. And I do put spinach in my kid's smoothie, and only one time has my 3-year-old is my picky guy. My kids are 8, 6, 4. I guess he's 4 now and 2. But then the 4-year-old man, he is just so picky. But he, I put a lot of spinach in last time, and he saw that bad boy packed up to the brim with spinach, and he was like, I don't want that yucky stuff. But he's seen the spinach in there before, just in different portions, and that portion threw him off. He was not having it.
Yeah, and that's a huge, portions are really a big deal, right? Think about something that you don't like. If you were offered a giant plate of it, it'd be like, oh, I don't even know how to finish the rest of my meal. If all I saw was just like fennel coming out of everything, right? Like, I don't want any of this. But if I had a small piece, or if we gave them, a tiny introductory serving, that feels really manageable, and it doesn't feel like there's all this pressure, right? So if you're hearing this and you're like, oh, I've never thought to add greens to a smoothie, I don't add 2 cups, right? Do a couple leaves. Try it, especially if they can't taste it. We want to show them that, like, this isn't scary, and oh yeah, you might like that. That's so much more appealing to say, okay, now I'll try to add a little bit more and see how that taste changes. And again, these are conversations, especially if our kids are a little bit older, that we can start to have with them.
It is so incredible. My 8-year-old now tries almost anything we put in front of him, and he doesn't like everything, but like just the fact that he tries it, I'm like, this is such a relief. Like, it feels so good. And also, to anybody listening who's like, man, my kid's so picky, he's eaten a lot of cheese quesadillas in his day. Like, he has not, we did not get crazy with like introducing crazy stuff, and now he's trying everything, and it makes me so happy. We made, I don't know if you had those cauliflower and broccoli burgers that it's in the new Oshiko's cookbook, but basically, it's like breaded broccoli and cauliflower, and you make it like it's a sandwich though. And he was just biting into those, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. I cannot believe that he's just like going all out with these sandwiches, and it just feels so good. And also to just say that food that you're putting into your body is so good for your body. It is fueling you. It is making you feel strong, and you're also not going to come down and feel like a crazy sugar crash in an hour. And
he's 8. Yeah. I think that's also something that's really important, especially if you're a parent of young children and you feel like this is never going to end. Picky eating is really common, and it really sort of has a parallel to control, to independence, all these things that our young toddlers, preschoolers go through, where they're trying to become more autonomous. They're trying to figure out, their place in the world, their likes, their dislikes. Like, it's no coincidence that picky eating runs right alongside that, right? It feels really good for our kids to say to us, no, I don't like that, or I get to choose to eat that, right? Those are all things that they're trying to explore and try on. And so picky eating is so much of that. And I think if parents, if we start to like obsess over it, or feel like we're doing something wrong, or what would happen to my kid that used to gobble up everything when they were, 12 months old. Like, just know that it's really natural. It's really normal. Obviously, there are stages and there's, a whole spectrum of picky eating, and some things are normal and some things might need to be, talked about more with like a pediatrician. But for the most part, if we do our job of continuing to offer, continuing to not make a big deal about it, they come out on the other side. And especially if the food wasn't a huge pressure or a huge point of contention every single mealtime, when they sort of come out of that picky eating, phase, if you will, they're way more likely to be like, oh yeah, cool, I'll try it, because it wasn't something that was forced on them for years to try. It just feels like now they're at a place where they're a lot more willing to explore those different types of foods.
So good. Okay, this is off topic a little bit, but I know that a question a lot of parents have is about peanuts. And so can you talk about introduction to that and when you do that and all that goodness?
Yes. So the research that's most recently come out on peanuts is sort of the concept of early and often introduction, right? So if you have kids that are a little bit older, probably around like 10-ish, those kids likely got the message that we wanted to delay exposure. Mm-hmm. So we thought, 10, 15 years ago, that the best way to prevent peanut allergies was to wait, to delay exposure, not give them any peanuts until they were about 2, 3, 4 years of age, depending on what literature you looked at. And we found that, whoopsie, that actually increased peanut allergies. And so we went back and decided, okay, now let's look more at the research. And it really shows that the more early, the more often you introduce peanuts is actually more protective. Now, that's not to say that you give your kids, peanuts every single day. They won't develop an allergy, right? Some kids just do. There is a strong family component, genetic component to different allergies, especially if you have other sort of, symptoms of an allergy. So kids with like skin issues or eczema are much more likely to be also have different kinds of food allergies. One food allergy makes it more common. You're going to have another, right? So please discuss this with your pediatrician as sort of my legal disclaimer. But for the most part, kids who are exposed early and often have a decreased risk. And that can feel really scary to a parent who's, like, wait a minute, you want me to introduce peanuts at 5 months old? My kid's not even eating solids yet, or how do I do that? And so we do have lots of ways, different ways to do this, depending on which type of solid feeding approach you're taking on our Plant-Based Juniors blog. But for, the easiest way I usually say is peanuts, are a choking hazard, and too much peanut butter is also a choking hazard. So you want to introduce peanuts, but we need to do it in a safe way. If you're doing purees, you can thin some peanut powder or thin just regular non-salted peanut butter, and try to get the kind that's only peanuts, doesn't have added sugar or added types of other additives to it. You can thin it with some breast milk and put it on your finger and just kind of let babies suck on it a little bit. You can thin it with some yogurt if you want to introduce it that way, especially if you've already introduced cow's milk to see if there's an allergy there. So there's lots of different ways you could sort of thin the peanuts to expose it to kids. You can also use a very, very thin smear of peanut butter onto toast and then slice it into like skinny strips about the size, the width of your pinky, and let baby kind of pick up and gnaw on that. So, we don't have an exact amount of how many times they need to be exposed before we consider them to be, safe. But the idea of early and often, and we usually say about, a teaspoon or so every couple days.
Wow, that's so crazy that delayed exposure actually increased the amount of kids who had allergies. And it's so prevalent in that age range that you just mentioned too.
It's really prevalent. Well, and here's the thing too with a lot of nutrition, right? I mean, there are things we're constantly learning. So, I feel like sometimes it feels like, oh, they go back and forth. Well, no, we're just learning more and we're getting new evidence. And so, the peanut thing came out of observing kids in Israel who eat this snack. It's like a peanut puff. And a lot of kids, it's sort of one of like their first foods, or, sort of those easy to grab, like snacky kind of foods. And they realized the rate of peanut allergy in that population was much less than anywhere else. Oh, what's happening? Oh, well, these kids culturally are introduced to this like peanut snack very early. Could that be something to do with it? So I looked into it, and that's when they kind of came away with that idea that early and often, and that's true for all allergies. So the top 8, right? So we know the most about food allergies from research on eggs, research on peanuts, and research on cow's milk. So we kind of assume that the rest of the top 8 are going to follow along the same lines. That's not always true, again, depending on the child, but for the most part, we do like to say, before 6, 7, 8 months of age, to try to introduce the top 8 early and often.
Wow. Okay. Last little topic here. I have two more little topics. Vitamins and supplements and seasonal eating. So let's do the vitamins and supplements. I give my kids Supervites, which is a kid's vitamin from Previnex, which is a vitamin company we buy from. What is your opinion on kids, either plant-based or not, taking vitamins? And then what are the supplements that, if a kiddo is totally vegan even, like what supplements should they be taking?
Yeah, I'm very pro supplement, especially depending on the child, right? So if we're talking about my strict vegans, my plant-based eaters, no way around it. We have to have B12. I'm not really a fan of fortified foods, and the reason for that is because if anyone is a parent of a toddler or even a preschooler, you know that what they eat every single day is not always the same. Some days they love milk, other days they don't. And so if we're only relying on these fortified foods to get nutrition in, they might not have enough that day, or they might have a decreased appetite and not get enough in, and then you might run into the risk of a nutritional deficiency. So I'm really a big fan of a B12 supplement, likely a vitamin D supplement depending on how much non-dairy fortified milk they're taking in, and maybe DHA. DHA is one of those things where there's not a ton of research. We do know that DHA is really important in both cognitive development and retinal development. How much kids need and is really sort of it's not conclusive. And the idea is that the fact too that even if you're an omnivore toddler, you're probably not eating salmon 3 days a week either. So we can say that we know DHA is really important, but we also know that the vast majority of kids aren't even meeting that need. And so it's hard to draw conclusive evidence to say, this deficiency is this and how much we need. But I think on the safe side, I supplement with DHA, and I usually say the downside is cost. And so, I think each family kind of has to decide if that's something they want to do. So that's my strict sort of like plant-based, yes. When it comes to other children in that, I'm really pro supplement, especially if you feel like you're stressed about your kids' eating habits and what they're getting in. Because what I hear so many times from parents is they take on the stress of their picky eater because they're like, but they're not getting this and they're not getting that. And if that is, and those nutrients are important. I'm not trying to say they're not, but especially if that's making you feel more pressure or making you feel like you're needing to offer this, or mealtime is becoming more stressful because your kids aren't eating the foods you think they need to. Giving a multivitamin is a really great way to say, okay, I know a lot of my kids' bases are covered. I have a lot more leeway in a sense to not feel so stressed if they're not eating their broccoli tonight. But it also gives, the kids the advantage to say, yeah, and I'm getting that nutrition in. So I'm very pro supplement for that population as well. One thing I will say is we have a free supplement guide on Plant-Based Juniors that goes into all of these different, supplements, whether it's B12, vitamin D, DHA, multivitamins, probiotics, whether or not kids need them, depending on the diet, and then also some of our favorite recommended brands.
Oh, I love it. Good. Okay, we'll link that in the show notes for sure. The last topic is seasonal eating, and I get really sad when I talk about this because I need to have avocados and bananas year round, okay? So we're entering winter, really. Talk to me about like the things that you focus most on in this topic in your own family, and just what suggestions you have in regards to seasonal eating.
And, I'm the same way, right? Like I am not perfect over here. My son eats a banana probably every single morning. I just gave my 8-month-old, a pint of raspberries, which are definitely not in season right now. So, I still choose the food that we like, but I do try to eat somewhat seasonal. And the reason for that is a lot of things. One, it tastes better, especially if we're trying to get our kids excited about these foods. I mean, we all know this, right? Like a tomato in January is not a tomato in August. So if I'm introducing, let's say, eggplant to my son and I give it to him in January, it's going to taste really flavorless, whether I give him that same eggplant in August, where it's just a lot more flavorful. So I think that's a really important sort of thing. The other thing is cost. So especially if you're like, yeah, I like the idea of eating more plants, but it's expensive. And, especially fresh fruits and vegetables, they do tend to be really expensive. More seasonal foods tend to be less expensive. And, that's true whether you're eating at a farmer's market or whether you're going to the grocery store to get your stuff. Things that are a lot cheaper right now are things like apples and pears and different kinds of squashes, right? Berries are going to be a lot more expensive than they are in June because there's, longer shipping, there tend to be, exported. There's lots of different factors that go into the different costs, and seasonality is a big thing. So right now, I'm really focused on, we do a lot of apples. We do a lot of citrus fruits. That's going to be really big in the winter. I love citrus. I love oranges. I love grapefruits. It's a really great one, especially for kids. Like, here's a cutie. Bye. Those kind of things. Squashes are really great. There's a lot of different things you can do with them. So I roast a lot of butternut squash. I do a lot of spaghetti squash. My son's not big on eating just spaghetti squash, but he'll eat it if I mix it in with like a pasta and a sauce. So we do that a lot. I'll roast up, different kinds of pumpkins or squashes and make them into muffins. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can introduce those. Pomegranates, one of my favorite sort of like fun things to introduce kids to because they like pop in your mouth and they're super juicy. So
that is a fun one.
And I also think it's fun, especially, again, going back to introducing kids to new foods, it's a way to say like, ooh, let's go to the grocery store and see what's in season, right? Like the squashes, again, just for example, right now are so much more plentiful at the store than they ever are in May. So we can go and pick out some different fun looking ones and go home and cook it. He might not try it, but at least he's having that sort of exposure.
What are the health benefits of pomegranates? Is it vitamin C?
Yeah, and they're super high in antioxidants. So especially foods that are colored blue or purple, most kids, especially kids, but adults too, that's one of, like, when we think about like the rainbow of food colors, all of those different colors mean something when it comes to different types of antioxidants, right? So the antioxidants, the anthocyanins that are in blue and purple foods tend to be something that we don't get a ton of, right? And think about that. A lot of us don't eat, except for like blueberries, maybe, a lot of blue and purple foods, but pomegranates are a really good source of anthocyanins.
Oh, so interesting. And I didn't know that citrus fruits were in season in the winter.
Yeah. Well, and I sort of like to remind everyone that like if you think about back to like the whole like scurvy thing and vitamin C, right? It's because the vitamin C abundance fruits in the summer typically used to not be available in the winter, and so citrus fruits are, and that's what sort of helps to fill in that vitamin C lack, if you will, during the wintertime. And they're good. I mean, gosh, oranges right now, especially as we get into like December and January,
really?
They're so good. Especially if you think an orange is like, whitish or gross inside, that's usually an orange that you'll get like in the summer months. But in the winter, gosh, grapefruits, ruby red, oranges, all those things are just really juicy and really yummy.
I mean, I feel kind of silly that I assumed that citrus fruits would be in season in the summer.
I mean, we live in an age where I can get blackberries all year long.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I think that's the one thing that it's hard when you say like what's in season, like, I don't know, everything's in season, right? At Whole Foods, it's in season all year long. So I think that, it doesn't have to feel, don't feel silly if, you're not sure, or, what, and also different areas of the country, the really big country have different growing seasons, right? Yeah. So what's available in my area in May might not be the same thing as what's available in May in California or what's available in May in Maine. So,
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm going to go buy some oranges and make that as like one of the sides for dinner for sure.
Yeah. So yummy.
All right, Alex. Well, thank you for coming back on and being so willing with your time here. Is there any recent books or anything fun you've recently discovered in your life outside of nutrition that you want to share with the listeners?
Gosh, what a great question. No, okay, no, that's not true. I just read The Alchemist. Did you read that?
Like years ago.
I know. I'm like so late to the party. Oh my,
10, 12
it's
years ago?
so good. No, not The Alchemist. Oh my gosh, The Immortalist.
No, I've never heard of that.
Okay. Yes, it's so good. The Immortalist. It's trying to think what she also wrote, and I'm like blanking right now, but it's great. I just finished it. It's such a great one. And I'm currently reading All Adults Here.
Okay.
Have you read that one?
No, I feel like I've seen someone post about it, but I don't. What kind of book is it?
It's good. It's like this, like it's all these like family stories, like
Okay.
intertwined. I really got into. You know, what's funny. You know, when you find a book that you really like, and then you kind of go in a rabbit hole to
Mm-hmm.
see, like what's similar. Well, I was finding that a lot of the books I liked reading all came from Jenna Bush's like book club,
Okay.
and I was like, oh, okay. Whatever she's picking, I'm liking. So I
Yeah.
kind of went through like all of her recent picks and like, was sort of making my way down the list. So I think that's a nice sort of, I don't know if it's a tip or a trick, but I just kind of found like, oh, okay, like 4 of the last books I've read had all been on her book club. So I kind of felt like, well, we must have a similar taste in what we like in books. So I kind of feel like she's my new refer to what kind of things I like.
Yeah, her and Reese Witherspoon has a book club.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's got good ones too.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much. And we're going to link the 7-day plant-based protein and also the batch cookbook.
Yep.
We didn't talk too much about the batch cookbook, but we'll have a link to that with a discount code and everything in the show
Awesome.
notes.
Yep, great.
Cool. Thanks, Alex.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lindsay.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, thank you, Alex, for coming on the show again. You guys can follow Alex on Instagram. She is Delish Knowledge over there. Make sure you also check out Plant Based Juniors. They are full of so many great resources. And don't forget, use the code Lindsay for 15% off all their ebooks. If you also want to check out Previnex, which is what I use for vitamins for my kids, go to Previnex.com and use the code ANOTHER for 15% off your order. You can find us on Instagram. We are Why Is Everyone Yelling over there. We also have a Facebook group where we would love to connect with you. And I would love to connect with you personally as well on Instagram. I'm Lindsay Hines 626. Reach out to myself or my assistant Emma anytime. Lindsay at sandyboyproductions.com or Emma at sandyboyproductions.com with any suggestions or feedback you have about the show. We would love to hear from you. Have a really great rest of your week. Have a wonderful Christmas, happy holidays, and we will see you next week on Why Is Everyone Yelling?